The glass elevator climbed silently through the heart of the Manhattan skyscraper, carrying Marcus Williams toward another failure. At 38, he had built an empire worth $3 billion, but he couldn't solve the problem waiting for him on the 42nd floor of his penthouse apartment. His two sons, 7-year-old David and 5-year-old Samuel, had driven away another nanny. Marcus pressed his palm against the cool glass and watched the city shrink below him. The Hudson River gleamed like silver ribbon in the afternoon sun, and Central Park spread out like a green handkerchief among the concrete towers. He owned pieces of this view: the hotel on Fifth Avenue, the shopping complex near Columbus Circle, the office building that cast shadows over Lincoln Center. But none of his success meant anything when he walked through his own front door. The elevator opened directly into his apartment, revealing 3,000 square feet of marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year. But the silence hit him first. No laughter, no running feet, no voices calling his name. Just the soft hum of expensive air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. "Mr. Williams?" Elena's voice carried from the kitchen. His housekeeper appeared in the doorway, her usually calm face creased with worry. "The boys are in their room. They haven't come out since Miss Patterson left this morning." Marcus loosened his tie and walked toward the kitchen. Elena had worked for his family for 12 years, first for his wife Sarah before the cancer took her, and now for him and the boys. She was the only constant in their lives, the only person who hadn't run away. "What happened this time?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would break his heart a little more. Elena poured coffee into his favorite mug, the one Sarah had bought him during their honeymoon in Italy. The ceramic was chipped now, but he couldn't bear to replace it. Miss Patterson tried to get them to eat breakfast. David threw his cereal bowl across the room. Samuel hid under the table and wouldn't come out. When she tried to help him, he bit her hand. Marcus closed his eyes. This was the 14th nanny in 18 months. 14 educated, experienced women who had come highly recommended and left defeated. The employment agency had started asking questions he couldn't answer. How do you explain that your children used to be happy? How do you describe the way they changed after their mother died? Did they speak today? Marcus asked, though he knew the answer. No words, Elena said softly. David made some sounds when he was angry, but no words. Samuel just stared at the wall. The silence was the hardest part. Before Sarah died, their apartment had been full of noise. David telling elaborate stories about dragons and spaceships, Samuel singing nursery rhymes in his sweet, high voice. They had been normal children then. Curious, playful, sometimes naughty, but always loving. The grief counselor had explained that children process trauma differently, that silence could be their way of protecting themselves. But understanding didn't make it easier to bear. Marcus walked to the boys' bedroom and pressed his ear against the door. He could hear the soft sound of breathing, the rustle of sheets, but no voices. He knocked gently. "David? Samuel? Daddy's home." No answer. He tried the handle, but the door was locked from the inside. David had figured out how to work the lock shortly after the third nanny left. Now their room had become their fortress, the one place where no stranger could reach them. "I brought pizza from Tony's," Marcus called through the door. "The kind with extra cheese that you like." Still nothing. He pressed his forehead against the cool wood and remembered bedtime stories, piggyback rides, Saturday mornings when the boys would climb into his bed and demand pancakes shaped like animals. Those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life now. His phone buzzed. Another message from the board of directors about the Tokyo merger, another crisis that needed his attention. 6 months ago, he would have been on the first flight to Japan. Now he couldn't leave the city for more than a day. His business partners didn't understand. They saw his distraction in meetings, his reluctance to travel, his shortened work days. They whispered about his priorities, questioned his commitment. But they had never stood outside a locked door begging their own children to let them in. Elena appeared beside him with a tray of sandwiches. "Maybe they'll eat something later," she said. "I made their favorite, peanut butter and banana." "Elena," Marcus said without moving from the door. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep putting strangers in their lives and watching them get hurt all over again. They need help, Mr. Williams. Professional help. I've tried that. 3 different child psychologists, 2 specialists in trauma therapy. They won't talk to anyone. They won't even look at anyone new. Elena set the tray on a side table. Maybe the right person just hasn't come along yet. Marcus wanted to believe her, but hope felt dangerous now. Every time he thought they were making progress, something would trigger a setback. Last month, David had seemed interested in a new puzzle. Then, a delivery man with a beard had come to the door, and David had hidden in the closet for 6 hours. The beard reminded him of Dr. Peterson, the oncologist who had tried so hard to save their mother. The apartment's landline rang, cutting through the quiet. Elena went to answer it while Marcus remained at the boy's door. He could hear her speaking in low tones, probably turning down another interview request or business call. The press had been fascinated by his story 18 months ago, the billionaire widower raising 2 young sons alone. They had painted him as a devoted father, a man who chose family over fortune. If they could see him now, standing helplessly outside his children's locked door, they might write a different story. Mr. Williams? Elena called. There's someone on the phone. About the nanny position. Marcus sighed. The employment agency kept trying, kept sending resumes and references for women who looked perfect on paper. Ivy League education, multilingual capabilities, experience with difficult children. They all sounded the same in interviews, confident, professional, slightly condescending. They spoke about behavioral modification and structured activities as if his sons were problems to be solved rather than hearts to be healed. Tell them we're not interviewing anymore. Marcus called back. Sir, this one is different. She says she's worked with children who don't speak. She has experience with trauma. They all claimed experience with trauma. Marcus had heard the same promises 14 times before. But Elena's tone was different, more hopeful than he'd heard her sound in months. What's her name, he asked. Grace Washington. She's calling from Brooklyn. Says she can come tomorrow if you'd like to meet. Marcus looked at the locked door one more time. Inside, his sons were living in a world he couldn't reach, trapped by grief too large for their small hearts to carry. Every expert had told him the same thing. Children need consistency, routine, professional care. They needed someone who wouldn't give up when things got difficult. Tell her to come at 10, Marcus said finally. But, Elena, this is the last one. If this doesn't work, I'm taking time off from everything. I'll figure out how to help them myself. Elena nodded and returned to the phone. Marcus could hear her giving directions to the apartment, explaining about the doorman and the private elevator. Another stranger would walk into their lives tomorrow, another person who would promise to help and then leave when she realized the depth of their pain. But as he stood in the hallway of his silent apartment, surrounded by all the wealth and success that meant nothing without his family's happiness, Marcus allowed himself one small moment of hope. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe the right person just hadn't come along yet. Inside their room, David and Samuel sat on their beds, holding the small framed picture of their mother that they kept hidden under David's pillow. In the photo, Sarah was laughing, her arms wrapped around both boys on a beach in Montauk. It was the last family vacation they had taken together, just 3 months before the diagnosis that changed everything. David traced his finger along his mother's face in the picture, the way he did every day. He remembered her voice, the songs she used to sing, the way she smelled like vanilla and coffee in the mornings. But he couldn't make himself speak about her, couldn't find words for the hole she had left behind. Samuel curled up next to his older brother, clutching a stuffed elephant that still carried the faintest scent of their mother's perfume. He had been too young to fully understand what cancer meant, but old enough to feel the terrible absence that had settled over their home like winter fog. Outside their door, their father was trying to build a bridge back to them, one failed attempt at a time. Tomorrow, another stranger would enter their world with promises and plans. But, for now, in the safety of their shared silence, the boys held on to the only truth that made sense, that love could disappear without warning, and speaking about it hurt too much to bear. The sun set over Manhattan, painting the apartment in shades of gold and shadow. In the kitchen, Elena prepared dinner that might go uneaten. In his study, Marcus stared at contracts he couldn't concentrate on. And, in their bedroom, 2 little boys grieved in the only way they knew how. Together, quietly, holding on to memories of the woman who had made their world complete. Grace Washington checked her reflection in the subway window as the train pulled into 59th Street. At 52, she had learned to read the doubt in wealthy people's eyes when they first saw her. They expected someone younger, someone who looked more like the nannies in their social circles. But Grace had something those other women didn't have: 30 years of experience loving children that nobody else could reach. She climbed the steps from the subway into the bright October morning, her worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. Inside the bag were letters of recommendation, child psychology books with highlighted passages, and a small photo of her own grandson, Marcus, who had inspired her to become a specialist in childhood trauma. The boy in the photo had the same guarded expression she had heard described in David and Samuel Williams. The doorman at the Williams building looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. Grace was used to this reaction. Her Sunday dress was clean but old, her shoes comfortable rather than fashionable. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a $3 billion world. "I'm here to see Mr. Williams," Grace said calmly. "Grace Washington." "I'm expected." The doorman checked his list reluctantly, then directed her to a private elevator that required a special key. As the elevator climbed, Grace thought about the phone call that had brought her here. Elena Vasquez had sounded desperate, explaining that 14 nannies had failed to connect with the Williams boys. Most agencies would have given up by now, but Grace had volunteered to try. She had been working with traumatized children for 15 years, ever since her own grandson had stopped speaking after witnessing a violent crime in their Brooklyn neighborhood. Traditional therapy hadn't worked for little Marcus. Neither had stern discipline or gentle coaxing. What had finally reached him was something much simpler. Someone who understood that healing couldn't be rushed, and that children needed to feel safe before they could find
This
their
is
voices
important.
again.
You need to listen
The elevator
carefully.
opened
Do you
directly
understand what we're
into an
asking of you?
apartment that took Grace's breath away. She had cleaned houses for wealthy families before, but this was something else entirely. The living room was larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment, with windows that offered a view she had only seen in movies. For a moment, she felt out of place in this world of marble and crystal. Then, she heard it, the sound of something breaking in the distance, followed by a man's frustrated voice. The sound reminded her of her own home during the worst of her grandson's trauma, when every morning brought new evidence of his pain. Elena appeared from the kitchen, her face lighting up with relief. She was a small woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, someone who understood hard work and heartache. Grace liked her immediately. "Miss Washington, thank you for coming. Mr. Williams is dealing with a situation right now." Grace set down her bag and listened to the sounds coming from deeper in the apartment. A child was crying, not the normal tears of a frustrated toddler, but the broken sobs of someone whose heart had been shattered. She had heard that particular cry too many times to mistake it for anything else. "How long has it been since they spoke?" Grace asked. 8 months for David, 10 months for Samuel. Samuel stopped first, right after the funeral. David held on a little longer, but Elena's voice trailed off. Marcus Williams appeared in the hallway, looking exactly like the photos Grace had seen in business magazines, but older somehow, worn down by months of helplessness. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man fighting a war he didn't know how to win. "Miss Washington, I'm Marcus Williams." He extended his hand, and Grace noticed the tremor in his fingers. "I should warn you, this morning isn't going well. David had a nightmare last night, and threw his breakfast against the wall. Samuel is hiding under his bed." Grace nodded calmly. "That sounds like a Tuesday morning with traumatized children. May I see them?" Marcus looked surprised by her reaction. Previous nannies had wanted to discuss their educational philosophy first or outline their behavioral management strategies. Grace just wanted to meet his sons. "They're in their room, but they've locked the door. They won't come out when strangers are here." "That's smart of them," Grace said. "They're protecting themselves the only way they know how." Marcus led her down a hallway lined with family photos. Grace studied the pictures as they walked. A beautiful woman with laughing eyes, 2 small boys playing on beaches and in parks, birthday parties, and Christmas mornings. In the more recent photos, she could see the shadow of illness creeping into the woman's face, the way the boys pressed closer to their mother as if they could somehow keep her safe. They stopped outside a bedroom door. Grace could hear muffled sounds from inside, the whisper of movement, the soft snuffle of someone trying not to cry. She placed her hand flat against the door and closed her eyes, listening with 30 years of experience. "David," she called softly through the door. "My name is Grace. I know you're scared, and that's okay. Scared is smart sometimes." No response, but the sounds inside the room shifted. Someone was listening. "I'm not here to take you anywhere or make you do anything you don't want to do," Grace continued. "I'm just here to sit with you if you'd like." I knew another boy once who stopped talking when someone he loved had to go away. Marcus started to speak, but Grace held up a gentle hand. She pressed her ear to the door and listened for several long minutes. Finally, she heard what she was waiting for, the soft sound of footsteps approaching the door. "My grandson's name was Marcus too," Grace said to the door. "He was 7 years old when he forgot how to use his words. For a whole year, he talked with his hands and his eyes instead. His mama worried he'd never speak again." A small thud against the door indicated that someone was sitting on the other side. Grace smiled and slid down to sit on the floor outside the room. "Marcus saw something scary happen to someone he loved," Grace continued. "After that, words felt too dangerous to use. What if he said the wrong thing? What if talking about scary things made them happen again?" Marcus Williams stared at the woman sitting on his marble floor, speaking to his sons through a locked door as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Every other nanny had insisted on face-to-face meetings, had demanded that the boys come out and behave appropriately. Grace seemed content to sit in the hallway as long as necessary. "Do you know what helped Marcus find his words again?" Grace asked the door. The silence stretched for several minutes. Then, so softly that Grace almost missed it, came a small voice from inside the room. "What?" Marcus Williams felt his knees go weak. Samuel had spoken. His 5-year-old son, who hadn't said a word in 10 months, had asked a question. Grace kept her voice calm and steady, as if children spoke to her through locked doors every day. Someone told him it was okay to be sad. Someone told him that love doesn't go away just because people do. And someone promised him that he didn't have to carry all that sadness by himself. Another long pause. Then, David's voice, rusty from disuse. "Did he start talking again?" "He did," Grace said. "But not all at once. First, he whispered to his stuffed dog. Then, he sang a little song his grandmother taught him. Finally, he told his mama that he missed his daddy who had gone to heaven." Grace could hear whispering inside the room, the boys talking to each other in voices too low to understand. It was more conversation than they'd had with anyone in months. "Would you like to tell me about your mama?" Grace asked gently. Silence again, but it felt different now. Not the wall of protective quiet that had surrounded the boys for months, but the thoughtful pause of children deciding whether to trust someone new. "She smelled like cookies," Samuel whispered. "That sounds nice," Grace said. "What kind of cookies?" "Sugar cookies with rainbow sprinkles. She made them every Sunday." David's voice was stronger now, though still cautious. "I bet she made the best cookies in the whole world," Grace said. "She did. And she read stories with funny voices. And she never got mad when we had bad dreams." Samuel was talking faster now, as if words had been building up inside him like water behind a dam. Marcus pressed his back against the wall and listened to his sons describe their mother to a stranger through a locked door. They were sharing memories they hadn't spoken aloud since the funeral, painting a picture of the woman who had been the center of their universe. Grace let them talk, asking gentle questions that drew out more details. She learned that Sarah Williams had sung lullabies in both English and Spanish, that she had hidden notes in their lunchboxes, that she had promised to take them to Disney World for David's 8th birthday, a promise that cancer had prevented her from keeping. After an hour of conversation, the lock clicked open. The door swung wide to reveal 2 small boys with red-rimmed eyes and serious faces. David was tall for 7, with his father's dark hair and his mother's gentle eyes. Samuel was smaller, still carrying a stuffed elephant that looked well-loved and slightly gray from washing. "Are you going to leave like the other ladies?" David asked directly. Grace looked at both boys carefully. They were thin, she noticed, probably not eating enough. Dark circles under their eyes suggested they weren't sleeping well either. But they were standing straight, meeting her gaze with the dignity of children who had been forced to grow up too fast. "I don't know," Grace said honestly. "That depends on whether you think I should stay." The other ladies said they would help us feel better, Samuel said. But they just wanted us to stop being sad. Being sad is important work, Grace said. When someone you love dies, being sad is how you honor them. The question isn't whether to stop being sad. The question is whether you want someone to be sad with you for a while. David studied her face for a long time. Do you know how to be sad? I do. I've had lots of practice. Did people you love die too? Yes. My husband died when my daughter was young. My mama died last year. And, for a while, I was so sad I thought I might forget how to breathe. Samuel stepped closer. But, you didn't die from being sad? No, sweetie. Sadness feels like it might kill you sometimes, but it doesn't. It just changes you. Makes you softer in some places, stronger in others. Marcus watched from the doorway as his sons considered this woman who spoke to them like they were capable of understanding complex truths about love and loss. Every other caregiver had tried to distract them from their grief, as if happiness could be forced through activities and routines. Grace was the first person to acknowledge that their sadness was legitimate, important, even necessary. Can you teach us how to be sad without being scared all the time? David asked. I can try, Grace said. But you'll have to teach me some things too. Like what? Like what your mama's favorite songs were. Like what games she played with you. Like how she made you feel safe when the world felt scary. For the first time in months, both boys smiled. They were small smiles, tentative and fragile, but they were real. And, as Grace Washington sat on the floor of a billionaire's hallway, surrounded by luxury she could never afford, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The healing would take time, months of patient work, setbacks and breakthroughs, moments of progress and periods of regression. But, for the first time since Sarah Williams had died, her sons had spoken her name aloud and shared their memories of her love. It was a beginning, small but precious, like the first green shoot pushing through frozen ground after a long, hard winter. Marcus Williams stood in his doorway, watching a miracle unfold in real time. The woman he had hired to watch his children was teaching them that grief could be shared, that sadness could be survived, and that love could continue even when the person you love is gone. For the first time in 10 months, he began to believe that his family might find their way back to joy. 3 weeks had passed since Grace Washington first sat outside the boys' locked door, and the Williams apartment had begun to sound different. Not quite normal yet, but no longer silent. David's laughter echoed from the kitchen where he was helping Grace make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Samuel's voice could be heard in the living room, reading picture books to his stuffed elephant in the same dramatic tones his mother had once used. Marcus stood in his study doorway, listening to sounds he had thought were gone forever. His business calls could wait. The merger with the Tokyo firm, the quarterly reports that demanded his attention, the board meetings that once seemed so urgent. For the first time in months, his priorities were crystal clear. Mr. Williams, Grace called from the kitchen. David wants to show you something. Marcus found his older son standing on a chair at the kitchen counter, carefully flipping a pancake that looked remarkably like a stegosaurus. Flour dusted David's dark hair, and syrup-sticky fingers had left prints on everything within reach. The kitchen looked like a disaster zone, but his son's face glowed with pride. Look, Daddy, I made it myself. Grace showed me how to pour the batter so it makes the spikes on the back. That's incredible, Marcus said, and meant it. 3 weeks ago, David wouldn't even look at food, much less help prepare it. Now he was creating edible dinosaurs and chattering about the difference between herbivores and carnivores. Grace stood beside the stove, her gentle smile taking in the chaos with obvious pleasure. She had transformed more than just the boy's willingness to speak. The apartment felt lived in again, warm instead of sterile. Children's books were scattered on coffee tables, art supplies covered the dining room table, and the refrigerator displayed finger paintings alongside Marcus's business documents. Samuel's making a triceratops, David continued, flipping his pancake with growing confidence. But his keeps looking like a regular circle with horns. From the living room came an indignant voice. It does not. It looks exactly like a triceratops. Tell him, Grace. Grace dried her hands on a dish towel and looked at Marcus with twinkling eyes. Would you mind settling this great dinosaur debate? I need to check on the bacon. Marcus walked into the living room where Samuel stood beside his own small cooking station. a toy kitchen set that Grace had suggested they move to the main living area. His youngest son was holding a perfectly round pancake with 3 small bumps that might generously be called horns. "This is definitely a triceratops," Marcus said seriously, examining the pancake as if it were a priceless artifact. "One of the best I've ever seen." Samuel beamed and carefully placed his creation on a plate. "Grace says Mama would have liked our dinosaur breakfast. She says Mama probably makes pancakes for the angels now." The mention of Sarah still caused a sharp pain in Marcus's chest, but it was different now. Grace had taught them all that talking about her didn't make the hurt worse. It made the love visible. Over the past 3 weeks, the boys had shared hundreds of memories of their mother, and each story had brought her presence back into their home in a new way. "Your mama loved dinosaurs almost as much as you do," Marcus said, settling onto the couch beside his son. "Remember how she used to roar like a T-Rex when she chased you around the playground?" Samuel giggled, a sound that Marcus had thought he might never hear again. She was terrible at T-Rex sounds. She sounded more like a sick cat. "The worst dinosaur impressions in the history of the world," David called from the kitchen. "But she gave the best dinosaur hugs." Grace appeared in the doorway, carrying a platter of perfectly cooked bacon and slightly imperfect but lovingly made pancakes. "Breakfast is served in the dining room, gentlemen. And, David, your Stegosaurus is a masterpiece." They sat around the formal dining table that had been used mainly for business dinners over the past year. Grace had covered the polished mahogany with a cheerful vinyl tablecloth decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. Proper etiquette was abandoned in favor of eating pancakes with their fingers and making the appropriate dinosaur sound before each bite. Marcus watched his sons giggle over their food and felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. For months, every meal had been a battle. The boys had picked at their food, eating just enough to survive, while he worried constantly about their health. Now David was on his second helping of everything, and Samuel was actually asking for more orange juice. "Grace," Marcus said during a brief lull in the dinosaur sound effects, "I got a call from the employment agency yesterday. They want to know if we need any additional support staff." Grace paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Over the past 3 weeks, she and Marcus had developed an easy working relationship built on their shared concern for the boys' welfare. But she knew that relationships with wealthy employers could change quickly, and she had learned not to assume her position was secure. "What did you tell them?" she asked carefully. "I told them we wouldn't be needing their services anymore." Grace felt her heart sink. Had she overstepped somehow? Had she grown too comfortable in this family that wasn't really hers? "I also called my lawyer," Marcus continued, "and asked him to draw up a permanent employment contract. That is, if you're willing to stay." Grace set down her coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. "Mr. Williams, are you offering me a permanent position?" "I'm offering you whatever you want," Marcus said simply. "These boys need you. I need you. You've given us back our family." David and Samuel had stopped eating to listen to this conversation with the serious attention that children bring to discussions about their future. "Does this mean Grace isn't going to leave like the other ladies?" Samuel asked. "Not if she doesn't want to," Marcus said. "Grace, the apartment has a guest suite that's been empty for over a year. It's yours if you'd like it. The boys would love having you here all the time. And honestly, so would I." Grace looked around the table at this family that had somehow become her own. She thought about her small Brooklyn apartment, about the long subway rides to Manhattan, about the uncertainty of contract work. But, mostly, she thought about David's tentative smile and Samuel's returning confidence, about the laughter that now filled these rooms. "I'd like that very much," she said quietly. "But there's something you should know about me first." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I don't just work with the children. I worry about their father too. And I think you need some healing of your own." The words hung in the air between them. Grace had noticed what the boys were too young to see. That Marcus was struggling with his own grief, his own guilt, his own fear of failing the 2 people who mattered most to him. "I've been thinking about that," Marcus admitted. "Elena mentioned that you've worked with families, not just children. Grief isn't something children carry alone," Grace said gently. "When a family loses someone important, everyone needs help finding their way back to wholeness." "I don't know how to do this," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be both parents to them." I don't know how to answer their questions about heaven or why good people die or whether they'll ever stop missing her. You don't have to have all the answers, Grace said. You just have to be willing to ask the questions with them. Samuel reached across the table and patted his father's hand with syrup-sticky fingers. It's okay, Daddy. Grace says not knowing stuff is normal. She says the important thing is being sad together instead of sad alone. David nodded seriously. And we can teach you things too, like how to make proper dinosaur pancakes and how to read stories with funny voices like Mama did. Marcus felt tears threatening, not the bitter, helpless tears he had shed in private for months, but something warmer and more healing. Would you boys like that? Having Grace live here with us? Yes, both boys shouted simultaneously, then dissolved into giggles at their own volume. Grace smiled and began clearing the breakfast dishes. Well then, it's settled. But I have some conditions of my own. Name them, Marcus said. First, no more business calls during family meals. The world can wait while we eat dinosaur pancakes. Marcus nodded. Over the past 3 weeks, he had already begun turning off his phone during the hours when Grace and the boys were actively engaged in activities. Second, family meetings every Sunday where everyone gets to say what's working and what isn't. Children need to feel heard. And so do parents. Agreed. And third, Grace paused, her expression becoming more serious. We talk about Sarah regularly. We keep her pictures up, we celebrate her birthday, we tell stories about her. This family doesn't pretend she never existed. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of his wife's name, but it was accompanied by something new, relief. For months, he had tried to shield the boys from his own grief, thinking that staying strong meant staying silent about their shared loss. The boys have been teaching me that remembering her makes them feel closer to her, not further away, Marcus said. I think I've been the one who was afraid to talk about her. Grief is scary for parents, Grace said gently. We want to protect our children from pain, but sometimes we forget that healing means going through the pain, not around it. Samuel climbed down from his chair and walked over to Grace, wrapping his small arms around her waist. Are you really going to stay forever? As long as you want me to, sweetie. Even when we're grown up and big? Grace knelt down to meet his eyes. Especially then. Someone has to make sure you remember how to make proper dinosaur pancakes for your own children someday. David joined the hug, and after a moment's hesitation, so did Marcus. They stood in their dinosaur-covered dining room, holding each other in the morning light that streamed through the tall windows, and for the first time since Sarah died, they felt like a complete family again. Later that evening, after the boys were asleep in their beds, no longer locked, no longer silent, Marcus and Grace sat in the living room discussing practical arrangements for her permanent move to the apartment. The conversation was easy, comfortable in the way that develops between people who share a common purpose. There's something else, Marcus said as they reviewed the room assignments. I want to establish a college fund for your grandson and a retirement account for you. This family owes you more than money can repay. Grace started to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. I'm not trying to buy your loyalty or make you feel obligated. I just want to make sure you know how valuable you are to us. Mr. Williams - Marcus. Please, we're family now. Grace smiled. Marcus, then, what you've given me is just as valuable as what I've given you. These boys have brought purpose back to my life. Watching them heal has helped heal something in me too. As if summoned by their conversation, David appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, holding his stuffed lion and looking slightly embarrassed. I had a dream about Mama, he said quietly. But it was a good dream this time. She was making pancakes with us, and she said she was proud of how brave we've been. Grace opened her arms, and David curled up on the couch beside her. Good dreams about people we love are gifts, she said. They're ways of feeling close to them, even when they're far away. Do you think she knows about Grace? David asked his father. Marcus considered the question seriously. I think she came 6 months after Grace Washington moved into the Williams apartment. The transformation was so complete that visitors often remarked they could hardly believe it was the same home. The sterile perfection had been replaced by the beautiful chaos of a family actually living together. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, books were stacked on every surface, and the sound of laughter echoed through rooms that had once been silent. But The real test came on a crisp December morning when David woke up with a fever and immediately began crying for his mother. Grace found him huddled in his bed, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks, calling "Mama, I want Mama," over and over. She had been expecting this moment. 6 months of progress couldn't erase 18 months of grief, and children often regressed when they felt sick or scared. "I know, sweetheart," Grace said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. "When we don't feel good, we want the person who used to take the best care of us. She used to make me special soup when I was sick," David sobbed. "She used to read me stories and put cool cloths on my forehead. She knew exactly how to make everything better." Samuel appeared in the doorway, his own eyes wide with worry. Seeing his older brother in distress had triggered his own memories of loss and abandonment. "Is David going to die like Mama did?" Grace's heart ached for both boys, but she had learned that honesty, delivered with love, was always better than false reassurance. "No, baby. David has a fever, which is his body's way of fighting off germs. It's very different from the sickness that took your mama away." "But what if Samuel started, his voice rising with panic. "Come here, both of you," Grace said, opening her arms. She gathered both boys close, feeling David's fever through his pajamas and Samuel's trembling fear. "Let's talk about the difference between regular sick and the kind of sick that your mama had." Over the next hour, Grace explained cancer in terms the boys could understand, not a fever or a cold, but something much more serious that doctors had tried very hard to fix. She answered their questions honestly, while David's fever gradually responded to the children's medication she had given him. Marcus arrived home early from a business meeting, having received Grace's text that David was unwell. He found all three of them in David's room, looking at photo albums while Grace told stories about her own childhood illnesses and how her grandmother had cared for her. "How are we doing?" Marcus asked, automatically placing his hand on David's forehead to check his temperature. "Better," David said, though his voice was still weak. Grace explained about different kinds of sick. "And she's going to make me soup, but not the same kind Mama made. A different special kind." "What makes it special?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. "She puts in extra love and a secret ingredient," Samuel explained seriously. "The secret ingredient is stories about brave children who got better." Grace smiled at Samuel's interpretation of her promise to tell healing stories while the soup cooked. Over the months, she had learned that the boys responded better to indirect comfort, stories about other children overcoming challenges, rather than direct reassurance about their own situations. "Also," David added, "Grace says it's okay to miss Mama extra when we're sick. She says missing her doesn't mean we don't love Grace too." This was the complexity that Grace navigated daily, honoring the boys' continued love for their mother while building new attachments that could coexist with their grief. It required delicate balance, never trying to replace Sarah, but instead expanding the boys' capacity for love and trust. "That's exactly right," Marcus said. "Your mama will always be special in a way that nobody else can be. But that doesn't mean we can't love other people too. Like how I love both chocolate and vanilla ice cream," Samuel said, proud of his analogy. "Exactly like that," Grace laughed. "Your heart has room for all kinds of love." As the day progressed, David's fever broke and his appetite returned. But the real victory came that evening when both boys asked Grace to read them the story that their mother used to read when they were sick, a tale about a brave knight who saved a kingdom while battling a terrible cold. Grace read the story in her own voice, not trying to imitate Sarah's dramatic interpretations, but bringing her own warmth and inflection to the familiar words. The boys listened contentedly, occasionally adding details about how their mother used to read the same passages. "Mama used to make the dragon voice really scary," David commented during a particularly dramatic scene. "She was the best at dragon voices," Samuel agreed. "But Grace does better princess voices." It was a moment of recognition that different people could bring different gifts to their lives without diminishing the memory of what they had lost. Grace had never tried to copy Sarah's parenting style, instead offering her own strengths and abilities while encouraging the boys to remember and cherish their mother's unique qualities. After the boys were asleep, Marcus found Grace in the kitchen, preparing ingredients for the next day's meals. She always worked with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they arose, creating stability through small, consistent actions. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "For today, for everything. I don't think I could have handled David's breakdown the way you did." "You're handling it better than you think," Grace replied. 6 months ago, you would have panicked when he started crying for Sarah. Today, you sat with him and validated his feelings instead of trying to distract him from them. Marcus poured himself a cup of tea from the pot Grace had prepared. These evening conversations had become precious to him, quiet moments when they could discuss the boys' progress and plan for upcoming challenges. "I've been thinking about Christmas," Marcus said. "Last year was such a disaster. The boys barely got out of bed, and I couldn't bring myself to put up decorations. Everything reminded us of what was missing. What are you thinking for this year?" "I want to do something different. Not trying to recreate the Christmases Sarah used to plan, but not ignoring the holiday either. Something that honors her memory while still allowing us to make new traditions." Grace nodded thoughtfully. She had been wondering how to approach the holidays. The boys' first Christmas since they had started speaking again. Their first Christmas with her as part of the family. "The boys have been talking about wanting to do something special for other children who are sad," Grace said. "Maybe we could volunteer somewhere. Make Christmas better for families who are struggling." "That's perfect," Marcus said immediately. Sarah always wanted to do more charitable work, but the business kept getting in the way. She would love knowing that we're helping other families in her memory. And we could start our own Christmas traditions too. New recipes, new games, new ways of celebrating that belong to who we are now. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of anxiety at the thought of change, but it was tempered by excitement. For months, he had been afraid to alter anything about their lives, as if change meant betraying Sarah's memory. Grace had slowly taught him that growth could be a form of honor, that moving forward didn't mean leaving love behind. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Elena answered the doorbell to find Mrs. Patricia Hartwell, the woman who ran the most exclusive domestic employment agency in Manhattan. Marcus had canceled their contract months ago, but Mrs. Hartwell had insisted on a personal follow-up visit. She swept into the apartment like a society matron inspecting her domain, her critical gaze taking in the cheerful chaos that had replaced the sterile perfection she remembered from her previous visits. "Mr. Williams," she said, barely glancing at Grace, who was helping the boys with their morning art project at the dining room table. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I felt I should check on your situation personally." Marcus bristled at the implication that his situation needed checking. "Everything is fine, Mrs. Hartwell. Better than fine, actually." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes swept over the dining room where Grace sat with David and Samuel, their heads bent together over a watercolor painting of dinosaurs in a garden. The scene was domestic and warm, but Marcus could see the disapproval in the older woman's expression. "Mr. Williams, perhaps we could speak privately? I have some concerns about the current arrangement." Grace looked up from the art project, meeting Mrs. Hartwell's cold stare with calm dignity. She had encountered this type of prejudice many times before. Wealthy people who assumed that someone like her couldn't possibly provide adequate care for their precious children. "Grace is family," Marcus said firmly. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of her." Mrs. Hartwell's lips tightened. "Very well. I've received some feedback from other families in your social circle. They're concerned about the children's development, their education, their preparation for the social obligations that come with your position." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Marcus asked, though he could guess. "I have several excellent candidates who could provide more appropriate guidance. Women with advanced degrees, experience with high society children, proper understanding of social expectations." Grace continued helping the boys with their painting, but Marcus could see the slight tension in her shoulders. She had learned not to take such slights personally, but they still stung. David looked up from his artwork, his young face serious. "Are you the lady who sent all those mean nannies who made us lock our door?" Mrs. Hartwell blinked, clearly not expecting to be addressed by a 7-year-old. "I sent qualified caregivers who were unfortunately unable to connect with you." "They didn't want to connect with us," Samuel said matter-of-factly. "They just wanted us to be quiet and stop being sad. Grace teaches us how to be sad the right way. Children shouldn't be dwelling on sadness," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. They need structure, education, proper social development. Grace finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. With respect, Mrs. Hartwell, these children have experienced profound loss. Any caregiving approach that doesn't acknowledge and address that trauma is doomed to fail. Miss Washington, while I'm sure you mean well, you lack the educational credentials and social background necessary to prepare these boys for their future roles. Marcus stepped forward, his anger visible now. Their future roles are to be healthy, happy human beings who can love and be loved. Grace has given them that. Your qualified candidates gave them nothing but more trauma. Daddy's right, David said, abandoning his painting to stand beside Grace. Grace teaches us math while we bake cookies, and geography when we look at maps of where Mama traveled, and science when we make volcanoes in the bathtub. Plus, she knows how to fix broken hearts. Samuel nodded emphatically. The other ladies just wanted to make us sit still and be sad alone. Grace lets us be loud when we need to be loud, and quiet when we need to be quiet. Mrs. Hartwell looked around the room, at the children's artwork covering the walls, at the educational games scattered on tables, at the obvious love and security radiating from both boys. But her expression remained disapproving. Mr. Williams, I fear you're making a mistake that will impact these children's futures. When they're older, they'll need to function in sophisticated social environments. They'll need to understand proper protocol, cultural refinement dash. They'll need to understand love, loss, resilience, and empathy, Marcus interrupted. They'll need to know that their worth isn't measured by their ability to impress other people, but by their capacity to care for others and for themselves. Grace stood up, placing gentle hands on both boys' shoulders. Mrs. Hartwell, I appreciate your concern for David and Samuel's futures, but I think you might be surprised by what we're actually accomplishing here. She walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a portfolio. David is reading 2 grade levels above his age, and Samuel has mastered basic addition and subtraction through cooking measurements. They're learning Spanish through songs and games, developing artistic expression through daily creative time, and building emotional intelligence through regular family discussions about feelings and relationships. She opened the portfolio to reveal academic worksheets, creative writing samples, and detailed progress notes. More importantly, they're learning to trust again, to hope again, and to believe that love doesn't end when people die. Mrs. Hartwell glanced through the materials with obvious surprise. The academic work was clearly advanced, the creative projects showed sophisticated thinking, and the emotional development notes painted a picture of 2 children who had made remarkable progress. This is impressive, she admitted reluctantly. But what about their social development? Their exposure to appropriate peer groups? We attend story time at the library every week, Samuel piped up. And we go to the park where we play with lots of different kids. Grace says diversity makes us smarter. Plus, we volunteer at the food bank on Saturdays, David added. Grace says helping other people is the most important social skill. Marcus watched Mrs. Hartwell's confidence wavering as she realized that her assumptions about Grace's capabilities had been completely wrong. The boys were clearly thriving academically, emotionally, and socially under Grace's care. Mrs. Hartwell, Marcus said quietly, I understand that you're trying to do your job. But 6 months ago, my sons couldn't speak. They were locked in grief so profound that medical professionals were considering extreme interventions. Grace didn't just give them back their voices. She gave them back their childhood, their ability to learn and grow and love. She gave us back our family, Samuel said simply. Mrs. Hartwell closed the portfolio and looked around the room one more time. The evidence was undeniable. 2 happy, healthy, articulate children who clearly adored their caregiver and were obviously receiving excellent care and education. Mr. Williams, she said finally, I owe you an apology. And, Miss Washington, I owe you a much larger one. I made assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts. Grace nodded graciously. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them. Indeed. Mrs. Hartwell gathered her purse and moved toward the door, then turned back. Miss Washington, would you be interested in working with some of our other families? We have several clients dealing with traumatized children who might benefit from your approach." Grace looked at Marcus, who smiled and shrugged. "It's your decision." "I'm very happy where I am," Grace said. "But I'd be willing to consult to help train other caregivers in trauma-informed approaches to childcare." As Mrs. Hartwell left, David and Samuel returned to their painting with renewed enthusiasm. The interaction had reinforced their sense of security with Grace, while also showing them that their family was strong enough to withstand outside criticism. "Grace," David said without looking up from his artwork, "I'm glad you're our Grace, and not anybody else's." "Me too," Samuel agreed. "Even if that lady thought we needed a fancier one." Grace laughed, pulling both boys into a paint-smeared hug. "I'm glad I'm your Grace too. Now, who wants to help me make that special soup for lunch?" As the boys raced to wash their hands, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. Mrs. Hartwell had represented everything he used to think mattered: credentials, social status, other people's opinions about what was appropriate for his family. Grace represented something much more valuable: genuine love, deep understanding, and the kind of wisdom that couldn't be taught in any university. 2 years later, on a warm May afternoon, Grace Washington sat in the audience of David's elementary school auditorium, watching her boy perform in the 3rd-grade spring concert. Her heart swelled with pride as 9-year-old David stood confidently on stage, his clear voice ringing out in a solo performance that would have been impossible when she first met him. Beside her, Marcus wiped away tears as his son sang, "You've Got a Friend in Me," the same song Sarah had sung to the boys as a lullaby. Samuel, now 7 and every bit as confident as his older brother, was scheduled to perform in the next act with his 1st-grade class. "He looks so much like her when he smiles," Marcus whispered to Grace, referring to Sarah's radiant expression in the photos that still graced their home. "He has her courage too," Grace replied. "Remember how terrified he was of speaking in front of anyone? Now look at him." The transformation had been gradual, but steady. David had started with whispered conversations, progressed to reading aloud at home, then volunteered to read to the younger children at their weekly library visits. When his teacher suggested he audition for a solo in the spring concert, Grace and Marcus had held their breath, waiting to see if he was ready for such a public challenge. David had practiced for weeks, not just the song, but also breathing exercises for managing nervousness and positive self-talk for building confidence. Grace had taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but doing something important despite being afraid. As David's solo ended to enthusiastic applause, Grace caught sight of Mrs. Patricia Hartwell 3 rows ahead, applauding with genuine warmth. The employment agency director had become an unlikely ally over the past 2 years, referring several families to Grace for consultation on trauma-informed childcare. She had even asked Grace to speak at a conference on innovative approaches to childhood grief counseling. Samuel's class took the stage next, 25 first-graders arranged in neat rows, their faces shining with excitement. Samuel stood in the front row, his confidence evident in his posture and bright smile. As the music began, Grace marveled at how far he had come from the silent, terrified child she had first encountered through a locked bedroom door. The first-graders sang, "What a Wonderful World," their young voices blending in sweet harmony. Samuel sang with obvious joy, occasionally catching Grace's eye and grinning. When they reached the line about friends shaking hands, Samuel spontaneously reached for his classmate's hand, inspiring the entire front row to join hands in a display of pure, uninhibited affection. After the concert, the boys ran to Grace and Marcus, chattering excitedly about their performances and already planning for next year's show. David had been invited to audition for the school musical, and Samuel wanted to learn to play the piano so he could accompany himself singing. "Did you see me remember all the words?" Samuel asked, bouncing on his toes. "Even when Tommy forgot his part, I kept singing." "You were both magnificent," Grace said, pulling them into a group hug. "Your mama would be so proud." "I felt like she was watching," David said seriously. "When I was singing, I could almost see her smiling in the back of the auditorium." Marcus knelt down to his son's level. "She was watching, in her own way. She's always with us when we do something brave and beautiful." The family made their way out of the school, stopping to accept congratulations from other parents and teachers. Grace noticed how easily the boys interacted with their peers, how naturally they included other children in their conversations. The social skills that Mrs. Hartwell had once worried about had developed organically through Grace's patient guidance and the boys' growing confidence. "Grace," called a familiar voice. They turned to see Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the family therapist who had worked with them during the first challenging months of Grace's tenure. The boys had initially resisted formal therapy, but Dr. Martinez had earned their trust through play-based sessions that felt more like games than treatment. "Dr. Martinez." Samuel ran to her with the enthusiasm he showed all his favorite people. "Did you see us sing? Did you see how loud we were?" "I did, and you were fantastic. Both of you." She smiled at Grace. "I was just telling my colleague about the Williams family. You're one of our greatest success stories." Grace felt a familiar warmth at such recognition, but her greatest reward was watching David and Samuel interact with the world as confident, emotionally healthy children. The formal therapy sessions had ended months ago, replaced by regular family meetings where they discussed challenges and celebrated victories. As they walked toward their car, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, then stopped walking entirely. "What is it?" Grace asked, noticing his expression. Marcus showed her the message from his business partner in Tokyo. The expansion deal they had been negotiating for 3 years had finally been approved, but it required Marcus to relocate to Japan for 6 months to oversee the transition. "Daddy, why did you stop walking?" David asked, tugging on his father's hand. Marcus looked down at his sons, then at Grace. 6 months ago, he would have taken the assignment without question. His business had always come first, and family had been expected to adapt to professional demands. But priorities had shifted dramatically since Grace had helped him understand what truly mattered. "There's a business opportunity in Japan," Marcus explained carefully. "It would be very good for the company, but it would mean living there for 6 months. "All of us?" Samuel asked with interest rather than concern. "Could we learn Japanese? Would we get to see Mount Fuji?" David added. "Mrs. Chin showed us pictures in geography class." Grace watched Marcus's face as he considered the possibilities. 2 years ago, he had been a man trapped by guilt and grief, unable to see beyond the next day's struggles. Now he was thinking creatively about how to balance professional opportunities with family stability. "What if we all went?" Marcus said slowly, the idea forming as he spoke. "What if this became a family adventure instead of a business separation?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting we all move to Tokyo for 6 months?" "Why not? The boys could attend international school, experience a different culture, become global citizens. You could study Japanese childcare practices, maybe write about your trauma-informed approach to help other families." "Japan has bullet trains," Samuel said with growing excitement. "And sushi. And robots." "We need to learn the language," David said practically, "and figure out how to make dinosaur pancakes with Japanese ingredients." Grace laughed at the boys' immediate enthusiasm. Their confidence in their family's ability to handle new challenges was testament to how far they had all traveled from the broken, frightened people they had once been. "It's a big decision," Grace said carefully. "Moving to another country, even temporarily, would be a huge change. But we'd be together," Marcus said. "That's what makes any place home." That evening, they sat around their dining room table, no longer covered with the cheerful vinyl dinosaur tablecloth, but still the center of their family discussions, talking through the practical aspects of a potential move to Japan. Grace had researched international schools. Marcus had contacted his Tokyo colleagues about family housing, and the boys had already started making lists of Japanese words they wanted to learn. "What about our volunteer work at the food bank?" David asked. "We can't abandon our Saturday families." "And story time with Miss Rodriguez at the library?" Samuel added. "She depends on us to help with the little kids." Grace felt her heart swell with pride. The boys' first concerns were about the people and commitments they would be leaving behind, not the adventures they might be missing. She had taught them well about responsibility and loyalty. "Maybe we could find ways to help people in Japan too," Grace suggested. "Every community has children who need support and families who need encouragement." "Could we video call Miss Rodriguez and show her Japan?" David asked. "She said she's always wanted to travel, but never had the opportunity. Could we send pictures to our Saturday families and tell them about Japanese food? Samuel wondered aloud. Marcus listened to his son's plan ways to maintain their connections while embracing new experiences, and he realized that Grace had given them something more valuable than healing from their grief. She had taught them how to love broadly, how to carry home in their hearts rather than limiting it to a place. There's something else to consider, Grace said gently. This would be our first big adventure as a family without your mama. How do you feel about that? The question settled over them with the familiar weight of Sarah's absence, but it no longer felt crushing. Instead, it felt like an opportunity to honor her memory in a new way. Mama always wanted to travel more, David said after a moment. She had a list of places she wanted to visit. Japan was number 3 after Ireland and Morocco. She would want us to see beautiful places and learn new things, Samuel added. She used to say that staying curious keeps your heart young. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed the boys a photo he had saved from Sarah's travel journal, a page where she had written about her dream of taking the family to see cherry blossoms in Japan, to teach the boys about different cultures, to raise them as citizens of the world rather than just inheritors of privilege. She wrote this when you were babies, Marcus said softly. She wanted you to understand that there are many ways to live and love, and that seeing the world makes you better people. Grace studied the page of Sarah's handwriting, elegant script describing dreams that cancer had prevented her from fulfilling. But here was a chance for her family to live out one of her deepest wishes, to become the adventurous, culturally aware people she had hoped to raise. I think, Grace said slowly, that this might be exactly what she would want for us. So we're going to Japan? David asked with growing excitement. If Grace is willing to come with us, Marcus said, looking at the woman who had transformed their lives. I can't imagine doing this without you. Grace looked around the table at the 3 faces waiting for her answer. Marcus, who had learned to balance ambition with love. David, who had rediscovered his voice and his courage. Samuel, who radiated confidence and joy. They had become her family in every way that mattered, and the thought of missing their next chapter was unthinkable. When do we leave? She asked with a smile. The boys cheered, and Marcus laughed with relief. As they began making detailed plans for their Japanese adventure, Grace reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to the Williams apartment to help 2 traumatized children find their voices. Instead, she had found her own purpose, her own family, her own future. 2 years earlier, she had sat on a marble floor outside a locked bedroom door, speaking to 2 silent boys about grief and healing. Now those same boys were planning international adventures, learning foreign languages, and dreaming of sharing their experiences with friends around the world. The transformation wasn't just in their ability to speak. It was in their capacity to hope, to trust, to believe that good things could happen even after terrible loss. As the evening wound down and the boys headed to bed, chattering about samurai castles and cherry blossoms, Marcus and Grace lingered at the table, reviewing lists and timelines for their move. Grace, Marcus said quietly, I need you to know something. When I first hired you, I thought I was paying for childcare. I had no idea I was gaining a family member, a co-parent, a friend who would change everything about how we live and love. Grace smiled, thinking about the long journey from that first desperate phone call to this moment of joyful planning. You didn't hire me, Marcus. You invited me into a story that was already being written. I just helped you all remember that it was a love story, not a tragedy. And now we get to write new chapters? The best chapters, Grace said with certainty. The ones where love grows stronger instead of smaller, where family includes everyone who chooses to show up, and where healing leads to hope. That night, as Grace packed away the remnants of their planning session, she thought about the other families she had worked with over the years, the children who had found their voices through patient love and understanding. Tomorrow she would start making calls, referring her current consulting clients to other trauma-informed caregivers, preparing for the transition that would take her family halfway around the world. But tonight, she simply listened to the sounds of her home. Marcus reading bedtime stories with funny voices, David and Samuel giggling over their plans for Japanese adventures, the comfortable silence of a family at peace with itself. These were the sounds of healing, of love that had survived loss and grown stronger in the process. Grace Washington had proved that some bonds transcend race, class, and social expectations. She had shown that love was the most powerful healing force in the universe, that patience could unlock the most guarded hearts, and that family was defined by commitment rather than biology. Most importantly, she had demonstrated that no child was beyond reach, no family beyond hope, and no love beyond the possibility of renewal. As she prepared for bed in the apartment that had become home, Grace whispered a prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here and for the adventures that lay ahead. In 6 months, they would be waking up in Tokyo, beginning a new chapter of their story. But wherever they went, whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. A family bound not by blood but by something stronger. The choice to love, protect, and cherish each other through all of life's seasons. The woman who had once been just a nanny had become the heart of a family, the voice of wisdom in times of uncertainty, and the guardian of memories and dreams. Grace Washington had not just survived 2 weeks in the Williams household. She had helped transform it into something Sarah could never have imagined but would certainly have blessed. A home where love multiplied rather than divided, where loss became the foundation for deeper appreciation, and where healing was not just possible but inevitable when approached with patience, wisdom, and unconditional love. The story that had begun with locked doors and silence had become a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of seeing beyond surface differences, and the truth that sometimes the most unlikely people become exactly the family we need. And as the Williams family prepared for their next adventure, they carried with them the knowledge that love, once rekindled, could light the way to any destination their hearts desired to explore. His sons were healthy, happy, and healing. They were learning academics and life skills, developing socially and emotionally, and growing into confident young people who understood both joy and sorrow. Most importantly, they knew they were loved by him, by Grace, and by the mother whose memory continued to bless their daily lives. The approval of people like Mrs. Hartwell no longer mattered. The only approval that counted was the laughter of his children, the peace in their eyes, and the knowledge that Sarah would be proud of the family they were building together. Grace hadn't just survived 2 weeks in their household. She had transformed it into a home where love could grow even in the midst of loss, where healing was possible, and where family meant something deeper than blood or social status. It meant choosing each other, day after day, through sickness and health, through grief and joy, through all the beautiful, messy, imperfect moments that made a life worth living. WS about everything important that happens to us. And I think she's very happy that we found someone who loves us the way she did. Samuel appeared moments later, drawn by the sound of voices and the comfort of family gathered together. Soon all 4 of them were settled in the living room, talking quietly about dreams and memories and the strange ways that love could continue even after death. Outside their windows, Manhattan glittered with the lights of millions of lives being lived, millions of families creating their own stories of joy and sorrow and resilience. But inside the Williams apartment, in the warm glow of table lamps and the gentle murmur of voices, one particular family was discovering that healing was possible, that love could expand to include new people without diminishing the love for those who were gone. Grace Washington had come to help 2 boys find their voices. Instead, she had helped an entire family rediscover the language of love, laughter, and hope. And in the process, she had found her own place in a story that was just beginning to unfold, one pancake, one conversation, one healing moment at a time. Grace opened her worn leather bag and pulled out a small notebook. "Now then," she said to the boys, "I'd like to learn everything you remember about your mama. Every story, every song, every silly thing she used to do. Can you help me with that?" David and Samuel exchanged a look, then nodded solemnly. They had found someone who understood that remembering wasn't the opposite of healing, it was the pathway to it. And for the first time since their world had fallen apart, they felt ready to take the first steps forward. Tomorrow would bring another chance, another person who might understand that healing couldn't be rushed or forced, but Tonight, the Williams family existed in their separate spaces, each carrying the same love and the same loss, waiting for something or someone to help them find their way back to each other. The city sparkled beyond their windows, millions of lights in millions of windows where other families were laughing, talking, living their ordinary lives. In the Williams apartment, silence reigned supreme, but underneath it, barely audible, was the sound of hearts still beating, still hoping, still believing that love could find a way to heal even the deepest wounds. And 42 floors above the busy streets of Manhattan, where success was measured in dollars and dreams in square footage, a father and his sons waited for tomorrow, and for the woman who might just change everything.